When the game was first envisioned, the team realized that creating content would be difficult and much the same from level to level. With this now known, the team thought of ways to use what we had built and use that towards a game where creating content and interactions for the player would be fun and enjoyable. When creating scenarios for the first time, it was a bit of a challenge to create interactions that would put the player in a state of constant reflex while providing excitement with different enemies and creating ways to present each one differently in each environment.
Each member performed different roles that matched their levels of expertise. We started this build with a basic sitter game with hardly any interactions, and have now moved to a multi-level rail shooter. At first the change was difficult. The team would come up with ideas, then get rid of them due to the confusion between members. After many trials and errors, we now have a game that we all are very proud of.
One of the ideas that we came up with that did not work well was when we were trying to have the players sit in one place while grading each of the students' paper while also having them keep the students' anger low by throwing apples at those students. After having the game be made during the first week, we realized that the game did not really flow well and ended up changing directions for the rest of the capstone. When building the blockout levels as well as the final build levels, snapping the objects together while holding Ctrl V made building much faster and easier while working with big or even the smallest objects.
Our game is a first-person rail shooter where the player moves on a rail system while shooting and using abilities to defeat enemies and capturing the souls stored within hidden portraits. In the game, the player is expected to collect at least 5 souls from the 7 portraits to unlock the next level in our game. In the final level, we challenge the player by pitting them against hordes of enemies, and we tie it all together with a boss fight at the very end.
Originally, we began creating a simulation game where the player sits at the teacher's desk in a classroom of zombie students. The player was required to manage the unruly behavior of their zombie students by throwing apples at them while grading their homework. Early in the development of our game, we began to realize that our gameplay was going to fall flat because it was lacking complexity. But most importantly, our gameplay was lacking a fun factor. We decided to create an entirely new game around our original mechanic of throwing a projectile at a target. We began developing a carnival-style shooter game. Shortly after changing our game, we decided to add another level of complexity to our game by enabling the player to move on a rail system. And our game made a final transition into becoming a rail shooter game within a dreamlike nightmare world.
Upon beginning a level, the player automatically begins moving along a rail, and as they move they activate a sequence of scenarios that must be completed before they can move forward. Some scenarios halt the player's movement on the rail, while others enable the player to continue moving. Each scenario must be completed before the player can progress, and they often require the player to defeat all on-screen enemies or avoid colliding with path hazards. The player may choose to use their primary weapon system to shoot a spiked ball projectile at their enemies, but they may choose to use one or more of their secondary abilities too. The player's other abilities include a shotgun attack which deals point damage for each round that collides with an enemy, an ability to fire an explosive pumpkin which deals damage within a radius, an ability to activate a temporary shield that blocks all incoming damage, and an ability to fire 3 grenade launcher rounds at once. All abilities have their own usage limits and cooldowns, and the projectile-based abilities require the player to aim on-screen with the mouse cursor. If at any time the player loses all of their health, then it's game over.
Our current game is completely different from the game we began creating, but we are overall satisfied with the way it turned out. Originally, we had planned for the game to take an educational approach with using grading tests as a main mechanic. After about the second week, we decided that we did not want to pursue the first pitch idea, and instead wanted to work on a rail shooter with our thoughts and ideas put into it. From the original pitch to what we have now, it is completely different. We only used several ideas from the original game pitch, which was the zombies, poltergeists, and the throwing of an object at the AI.